Welcome to FT Markets. The Eurozone's economy is officially back in growth. Eurozone figures released today show 0.2% expansion for the third quarter, up from nothing in the previous period. Although small, the figure is better than analysts' forecast of just 0.1%. I have with me Ferdinando Giugliano, the FT's Global Economy News Editor. So can investors afford a sigh of relief?
Well, the figure is better than expected, as you said, but if we go to the first chart, you will see that really there is very little to celebrate. Look at how the Eurozone is doing compared to the UK and the US. The UK and the US are already above the peak before the recession, whereas the Eurozone line is still there, flatlining, picking up, but you really don't see any sign of sustained growth, and that's what investors are really hoping for.
So even though they've beat analysts' expectations in this quarter, it's a question of very low expectations relative to the US and UK.
Absolutely. I think it's now, many investors assume that the new normal for the Eurozone is some sort of very mild growth. Could get better over the next few quarters because of a weak euro, which will boost export, and because of oil prices, which are plummeting, helping the Eurozone consumers who will have more cash to spend on things which are not petrol related. Yeah. But I think we're still talking about very slow growth.
And if we go to the second graph, we can see that perhaps one of the rays of light in an otherwise very modest performance is the fact that Greece and Spain, two peripheral countries which have certainly had their problems, actually did quite well. Albeit other peripheral countries such as Italy not so well.
Well, that's in a way the surprise of the last few quarters, is that you see for many years the narrative has been about the core of the Eurozone, countries like Germany, Finland, the Netherlands, doing relatively well, while at the same time there was the periphery which was lagging behind. And what we see now is that countries like Spain, that's happened for a while, Ireland, which didn't produce any figures to date, but has been growing quite strongly over the last few quarters, and now even Greece are posting some decent growth figures. Now, we should bear in mind the recession there has been catastrophic, particularly Greece. Unemployment levels are incredibly high. But what's interesting is that when you compare the performance over the quarter in Spain and Greece to the one, say, in Germany or Netherlands, where the economy barely grew, well, there is a positive surprise. Obviously, in the periphery, the one laggard who's still there is Italy, which hasn't recorded positive growth since 2011. So that's a really long period of recession, and for the government to grapple with.
Apart from Italy, do you think this idea of having a core and a periphery is becoming a little outdated, given that the periphery countries are arguably the ones that are reforming perhaps more than some of the core countries, the ones that are growing more than the core countries, at least over the last few quarters?
Well, absolutely. I mean, even in terms of reform effort, you could say that the German government has done very little, while under the pressure of the IMF and the European Commission, countries like Spain have actually got their act together and passed some significant labor market reforms, for example. So I think, in a way, the concept still applies in terms of things like unemployment levels, clearly GDP levels. But I think in many other ways, the picture is becoming more complex.
And if we go to our final graph.
Yes, this is really, in a way, another way of looking at the Eurozone problem. And here we're seeing the two big challenges for the ECB. And we see inflation, which is still stuck near the zero bound, and we see lending expectations for SMEs, which are really still negative. So in other words, SMEs expect credit to continue to contract. What's the ECB doing about it, Chris? I mean, what's your view?
Well, next week they're starting to purchase so-called asset-backed securities, sliced and diced bundles of loans, in order to try and boost lending to SMEs. But there's a lot of doubt in the market as to whether there is sufficient volume to do that, and whether, because the ECB is just purchasing the safest part of these ABS sliced and diced loans, whether it's really going to achieve the kind of risk transfer that banks need in order to unblock lending.
And obviously, the big question among investors is whether the fact that growth is still so poor will lead the ECB to do more, and that means sovereign bond buying. And I don't know what do you think? Do you think we're getting closer to it after today's numbers?
Well, certainly in terms of these lines, it looks like we're certainly not getting any further away. And as long as these lines, the inflation lines, the medium-term inflation outlook remains very subdued, I think Mario Draghi is still going to have a few sleepless nights yet.